Have you ever wondered why West Virginia is called West Virginia? Well, it's not a coincidence that West Virginia shares its name with its neighbor to the southeast, Virginia. The history of West Virginia's statehood is a very interesting chapter of American history and deeply intertwined with the state of Virginia. Today, we will learn about that history, the history of how West Virginia came to be. Now let's go back to colonial America in the 17th and 18th centuries. There is no concept of West Virginia yet. At this time, all of the land that is today part of West Virginia was part of the newly established colony of Virginia. Virginia was the biggest of the 13 colonies, and even after the American Revolution, her dominion included everything south of the Ohio River all the way to the Mississippi. It's important to remember that the early United States were much more powerful in relation to the federal government than they are today. Many early Virginians, including Thomas Jefferson, didn't believe that the United States was nearly as durable of an institution as the state of Virginia was. Now, this Empire of Virginia, as we may call it because it was so expansionist, was controlled primarily by people who lived in the east of this vast state. These were plantation owners, wealthy slaveholders with English blood and English customs. These wealthy slave owners had no interest moving west into the Appalachian Mountains. The land was coarse and rough and barely sufficient for anything more than mere sustenance farming. The frontier was also susceptible to attacks from Native Americans. Rumors of grisly massacres on the western frontier swept through the Commonwealth, leaving only the boldest or most desperate to populate Virginia's western frontier. And those desperate men and women did begin to settle the frontier, slowly but surely, over the 18th and 19th centuries. The population of those who settled in western counties of Virginia was a large mixture of Scots-Irish, those descended from Protestants who immigrated to Ireland from Scotland and northern England, and Germans who decided that this was the best place to settle. The dialect spoken by the Scots-Irish in particular was very different from the plantation owners in eastern Virginia. The term Cohee emerged to describe these settlers because the dialect they spoke replaced the word he said with quoth he. Cohee was a disparaging term associated with poverty and practicing a different type of Christianity than the English slave owners in the East did. As difficult as it may be to understand today, people in the early United States perceived these two populations as being separate ethnic groups. From the very beginning of Virginia's statehood, West Virginians were given the short end of the stick representationally. The Constitution of the state of Virginia, ratified in 1776, limited voting rights to only white males owning 25 acres of improved land or 50 acres of unimproved land, a stipulation that greatly favored the eastern landowners. Virginia also adopted a system where the slaves were counted as people only for the purposes of proportional representation, despite the fact that they were denied rights in almost every other respect. This measure favored localities controlled by wealthy English-descended slave owners. West Virginians rarely owned slaves at the time, so this was yet another offense to them. The first positions for West Virginia's statehood, naturally, were voiced even before the American Revolution finished. Settlers petitioned the Continental Congress to recognize the land that would become West Virginia, as well as parts of Pennsylvania and Kentucky, to become the state of what they wanted to be known as West Sylvania. Of course, Virginia and Pennsylvania saw no advantage to relinquishing large swaths of territory, and the bid was rejected. Sectional rivalries continued, and were very evident during the constitutional conventions held by the state of Virginia in 1830 and 1850, where Easterners argued that it was critical that only men who owned a significant amount of land be allowed to participate in the political system. So how then could West Virginia become a state if the people in Eastern Virginia were against her statehood? The answer lies in the American Civil War. Here is a map of the United States right before the American Civil War. Far and away the furthest point north in what would be the Confederate States of America is the northern panhandle of West Virginia. In fact, Wheeling, West Virginia is just an hour southwest of Pittsburgh and well north of Cincinnati. When the first southern states began to leave the Union in 1861, the state of Virginia had a difficult choice to make. Unlike many states in the Deep South, secession from the United States was initially unpopular amongst the majority of Virginia's leaders. A sizable minority of people were secessionists, however, enough so that the legislature of the state of Virginia called for a special convention to discuss secession. Most of the dignitaries from the western counties opposed secession, though it is important to note that few, if any of them, were abolitionists, and almost all delegates at the convention spoke favorably about the institution of slavery. The convention in Richmond slogged on for 2 months, and for a while the delegates were unable to come up with any sort of decision. In May of 1861, things changed when Abraham Lincoln asked the Virginia government to provide the Union with 3,500 troops. This was extremely insulting to Virginian leadership, and was ultimately the straw that broke the camel's back. Many delegates who were on the fence decided secession was the right thing to do. So in May of 1861, Virginia left the United States. The delegates from the northwestern counties of Virginia suddenly found themselves in a foreign nation, which to them was unacceptable. The next month, in June of 1861, these delegates who favored remaining in the United States met in Wheeling, West Virginia, for the first of 2 conventions in the city of Wheeling, which were called to restore the Unionist government of Virginia. The first convention was held to elect delegates for the second convention, which is where the real action happened. In June of 1861, men from 32 of Virginia's western counties debated the future of Western Virginia. Many of the delegates felt that Eastern and Western Virginia could never be reunited, and that it was time to form a new state. Others pushed back against this idea, stating that it would be necessary to create a restored government of the state of Virginia before a new state could be created. This logic goes back to the law stating that a new state could not be formed without the approval of the state it was formed out of. So the Unionist government of Virginia was formed and claimed to represent the entire state of Virginia despite barely controlling even half the counties in West Virginia alone. This government even claimed Richmond as its capital despite it being the capital of the Confederate States of America at the time. It was a government in exile, but it was recognized by Abraham Lincoln as the legitimate government, which was enough for the wheels to begin turning for West Virginia's statehood. The process took over a year and was conditional upon the gradual abolition of slavery, but finally, in June of 1863, West Virginia was admitted to the Union. Virginia would be the only state to lose territory as a result of the American Civil War. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you learned something about West Virginia. Please check out more videos that I make because I think they're fun. And see you next time on the DC Show.